Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at these three computers that I picked up for a total price of 30 euros. Now I can hear you guys thinking, why make such a purchase? Well, there are a number of reasons. One, I like the Antec case in the middle. That's why I primarily chose to purchase these three computers. But I also like the idea of purchasing three desktop computers without really knowing what's inside. And I was also looking for some post-2000 desktop machines to play with. And with these three computers, I also got two plastic bags and one plastic container filled with goodies. And a Philips LCD monitor, 19-inch. So that's part of the idea. See what we have here and if it was actually worth the 30 euros. Now, these are obviously like early 2000 machines. They're still in the beige time area. So mostly AMD 64 or Intel Pentium 4, I assume. And that's the goal of this video, just to see what is inside. So let's start with the first one. We have this open case here, two optical drives, a disk drive, and a fairly common open case design. Then what we have here is an iOmega DVD drive and a beautiful Antec case. Now this is a real heavy one, and I actually made the purchase because this Antec case was in here. And then finally we have a pretty, generic case here with a gigabyte sticker. And here we have them, our three beige towers. And let's start with the first one, the open case. A very common case design. Obviously has an AMD 64 Athlon CPU inside if it hasn't been altered. Not really sure what's in this Antec, probably also some kind of AMD 64 or perhaps an Intel Pentium 4, but I really like the case design and this iOmega optical drive. The black 3.5-inch drive bays here don't really match, but yeah, we'll see what we can do about that. And finally, we have a pretty generic ATX case design, two USB ports here. We have a gigabyte sticker and two optical drives. Pretty generic ATX style case from that period. So let's take a look at the back of the computers, because that's where we mostly find the interesting stuff. Now on the listing, it didn't show the back of the computer, so I had no idea if there were, discrete or integrated graphics cards, whether they had sound cards or other peripherals that might be interesting. So, I thought that 30 euros was an interesting price point for three computers, so I figured what the hell. So on the first one, we seem to have a modified power supply. I don't think this was original. We do have a separate video card here and a pretty standard ATX I/O panel. The middle one here seems to be a little bit older, doesn't have integrated audio, has a separate video card, and has two additional cards here, sound and 4 USB ports. And the third one, yeah, I don't think that this one will boot right off the bat, so it needs some work. But before we look at the actual computers, let's see what we have in this little plastic box here. So it's always interesting to see if we will find something useful. Now there is this IDE mobile rack basic cool thingy in here, which is basically one of those, 5.25-inch drive caddies, which are pretty handy. I mean, you can use them to just swap hard drives in and out, so I'm probably going to keep that. We got this 4-port Ethernet broadband router. Nothing really special here, but still in box with a power supply. Might put it to some use. Got an MT-VGA adapter board here, NVIDIA TNT2 M64, not the best card, so not really bothered by the fact that it's empty because I have like a dozen of those. There were also some IDE hard drives in here. Here we have an IBM, I think this is 1.2 gigabyte IDE. There was also this Quantum Trailblazer here, also IDE. And a Seagate Barracuda, 80 gigabyte. If I have to put my money on which hard drive failed, it's gonna be on this one. I've got some other crap here like headphones, CPU, coolers. This is probably still useful. some cables. We've got this small power supply unit here, 350 watts. Might check that one out as well. And then, you know, other crap like a CD-ROM drive, networking card, some RAM modules, some other crap, wireless router, cable. So yeah, nothing really special. But yeah, let's start our journey here with this guy here. A generic ATX style case. Let's open her up, and somebody basically just threw in the motherboard inside this case. Doesn't seem to come with any RAM. We do have a nice looking CPU cooler, but that's basically it. So yeah, it will be interesting to see if this one still works. The caps seem okay at first glance. Let's see what else we have in the case here. Luckily, the seller was kind enough to leave the I/O plate here in the case, which is always handy. And other than that, you know, we have power supply here, still some IDE cables. We have a disk drive and 2 optical drive, but no hard drive. So let's start with the power supply, 300 watts. Let's get that one out of the case. So yeah, 4 screws typically hold a power supply in a case. So let's go ahead and remove those. And let's take a look at the motherboard. This is an ASRock 939 ABXM with a cool looking Zalman CPU cooler and an AGP 8X slot. For SIM modules DDR400. Found this AGP card that I still had lying around. Not really sure if it works, so that will not make the debugging process easier. We're also going to be needing some RAM, so yeah, like every retro collector, you probably have like 1,000 RAM sticks laying around. Now the goal is always to find a matching pair of SIM modules, because it's one thing to find, you know, the same brand, but you also need to have the same type, whether it's, you know, DDR400 or DDR333. Sometimes there are also differences in voltage. So yeah, your best bet is to find 2 identical sticks. And I think in this batch I seem to have found one, which are these 2 here. So let's take a look. DDR400, 256 megabyte each. Now, as this is a dual channel setup, we need to put the 2 sticks in 2 banks of the same color. You can basically choose whether you pick the blue ones or the black ones. I'm going to go with the blue ones here. So I'm going to put the 2 sticks in there, which should give us, you know, dual channel 512 megabytes of RAM. Now we also need an AGP card, so I'm going to slot in this. I think this is some kind of FX card. I don't know. I don't know if it's working. So yeah, probably not a good idea to use a video card that you're not sure if it's working. The Philips monitor seems to be lighting up just fine, so that is good. And let's see if the computer will start. I also added this hard drive here for some additional load. That's not really necessary. So when you plug it in, you see the fan spinning a bit, but you need to turn it on. So you need to short these 2 pins here on the motherboard, and then everything will start, but we don't get anything on the screen. Now there are a couple of things wrong with my approach here. One is, you know, using a video card that you're not sure if it is still working is not a good idea. So you want to go with components that you're absolutely sure are in working order. Second, there is no PC speaker installed here, so you don't get any audio feedback on what's wrong. So let's go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to be using this Trident PCI video card, which I know for 100% certainty that it works. So I'm going to plug in the monitor there, and I'm also going to be attaching this PC speaker here on the motherboard. So typically there's a 4-pin connector on the motherboard that you can use to hook up the PC speaker. And then let's see if we get an improvement. And nothing. Same thing. So no video output and no beeps from the PC speaker. So yeah, that's a little bit annoying. Now yeah, at this point there can be a multitude of problems. I mean, the motherboard could be dead, CPU could be dead, video card might not be compatible with the motherboard, although that's highly unlikely. There could be an incompatibility with the RAM sticks. You know, perhaps they need to be put into other banks. Perhaps you should try with one RAM stick. But yeah, you have a multitude of issues that could be at hand here. So, you know, I did wanted to remove the CPU cooler here just to take a look at the CPU. Not that you can see anything visually wrong with a CPU, but just wanted to make sure that I knew what I was dealing with here. So getting the CPU cooler off is pretty easy. And you know, from the motherboard, I knew this was a socket 939 motherboard, so it carried an AMD 64 CPU. I already knew that, but it's always interesting to see what type of CPU you have on here, especially if it does not boot. So let's go ahead and take a look at the CPU. There's a lot of cooling paste here on the top of the die of the CPU here. And, you know, it's always pretty messy to get this off. I think it's probably best to kind of remove the paste while the CPU is still in its socket, because you're basically going to make a whole mess here. You're going to be, you know, your fingers are going to get dirty. You're going to be turning the CPU around, getting it perhaps on the pins on the back. So perhaps it's just better to leave it in the motherboard and then just clean it like that. But yeah, this is not what I did here, but I was able to clean it. And this turned out to be an AMD Athlon 64 3000. I think this runs at 1.8 gigahertz. Now there are lots of scratches here on the top plating here of the CPU, probably because I know when you're removing and adding CPU coolers, you can scratch the top layer of the CPU, but normally, yeah, it doesn't impact the overall working of this AMD CPU. Now, typically these things don't break all that often, so I'm not suspecting that there's anything wrong with this CPU. I did replace it with another Athlon 64 CPU that I had lying around, but I had the same issue, so the thing just wouldn't start. Now, although most capacitors on the board looked in pretty good shape, I did notice one here on the left of the socket which was kind of bulged, so that's not good. Although it's highly unlikely that this would cause the computer to not do anything at all. Now, this ASRock motherboard comes with a socket 939, which is basically a second generation socket for the Athlon 64 processors, the socket 754 being the original one. Now, this socket does support dual channel memory, which is basically a big upgrade from the previous one. It also has these 4 notches here on the pin grid, making sure that you don't, you know, put the CPU in the socket in the wrong way. It also has this little triangle here that you also see on the silk screen of the PCB. So yeah, making it very difficult to put this CPU in its socket in the wrong way, which is a good thing. So let's put our CPU in here. Now I'm not going to be putting any cooling paste on it just yet because I'm still, you know, seeing if the CPU will still run. So let's look at the CPU cooler before we attach it. And I really like this Zalman CPU cooler design. I think it's really cool with the fins there on the side. It has a standard 3-pin CPU cooler connector, and it also has this FanMate 1 little control unit where you can, you know, control the speed of the CPU with this little knob here. So yeah, putting the CPU cooler on is easy enough. There are 2 holes here for attaching 2 screws, which can be put through this little bracket here on the CPU cooler, so that's easy enough. Now, I also decided to go with 2 different RAM sticks here from Corsair, 2 identical ones, DDR400, 512 megabyte each. You know, because I'm certain that these RAM sticks work. I'm also going to try them in a different bank here, again in dual channel mode. Normally this should work. I mean, the motherboard manual states that it doesn't really matter where you put them. But it didn't work in the black ones. It also didn't work in the blue ones. So again, you know, starting the computer with a PC speaker resulted in nothing. But much to my surprise, when I removed one of the 2 SIM modules, the computer actually started booting. So that was pretty cool. I was kind of excited about this. And here we can see that we are dealing with an AMD Athlon 64 3000 plus, 1.8 gigahertz, 512 megabytes of single channel memory. So let's go into the BIOS and we can see that it has detected a 512 megabyte stick in the DDR3 slot, but here it is saying that it's running at 166 megahertz. So it has detected this as being a DDR 333 SIM module, although it was a DDR 400 one, so it should basically run at 200 megahertz. So perhaps it's something to do with the fact that it's running in single channel, I don't know. But as I said, I wasn't able to boot the thing in dual channel mode for some reason. Now I also noticed that after hooking up a hard drive with Windows 98 on it, that the computer didn't want to boot into Windows 98. It kept displaying this blinking cursor. And it was only after I replaced that SIM module with another one that I was able to boot into Windows 98. So I guess this motherboard is pretty picky when it comes to the memory that you use. So as you can see here, the PC is booting, and instead of showing that blinking cursor, it boots straight into Windows 98 off of this hard drive. Now, as far as the dual channel setup is concerned, I did try a number of, matching sticks here that should work in a dual channel configuration. I mean, all of these modules here are from the same brand and same type, and usually two of them should work fine in dual channel mode, but I wasn't able to get it up and running with either of these sticks on this motherboard, which was kind of surprising. And according to the manual of the motherboard that I have right here, there is a section on how to populate the SIM modules here on this motherboard, especially if you want to run it into a dual channel configuration. And the motherboard is pretty clear that you can choose to put them either in the blue slots or the black slots. So you can populate two SIM modules in two of the blue slots, and that should give you dual channel A, or insert them into the black slots in order to get the dual channel B up and running. So either one of those should work. But in my case it doesn't, because the PC simply doesn't want to boot when two modules are installed. Now the Philips LCD monitor was in pretty rough shape, especially the stand here at the bottom. It was really gross. So also on top here, there's like lots of, not really sure I want to know what's on this thing. So yeah, definitely needs a little bit of a cleaning, but 19-inch LCD monitor, not bad. I mean, just look at all of the gunk here that is, inside the monitor. Probably been sitting in a basement somewhere for I don't know how many years. So yeah, time to give it a little bit of a cleaning. So we're gonna be doing a partial disassembly of the thing, and then just giving it a good clean. I mean, just good enough that you don't get any life-threatening diseases from whatever dirt or gunk is on this screen. But in the end, yeah, it turned out to be okay. Normally you should completely disassemble this, but I didn't really feel like doing that. Now, because this computer didn't have a video card, I had to find one myself. And one of the first cards that I picked up here was this NVIDIA card. This is model MS8839, and it's a very basic GeForce 2 MX200. So yeah, pretty low end, but for late 1990s, early 2000 games with a CPU like this, it should be able to run a lot of games. And that's ultimately my goal here, just to create a very basic Windows 98 machine which has decent performance for these late 1990s, early 2000 games. And as you can see here, 3D Mark was running just fine. I mean, if you were to go like period correct and find good video cards, you can easily spend like €100. But with a setup like this, I mean, costing you like €10, installing Windows 98 on it will give you a fairly compatible system, and it will be able to run all of these late 1990s, early 2000 games without too many issues. And with a platform like this, you get a lot of choice in terms of video cards. I mean, you can, like I did here, just pick whatever you have lying around, but you can also go like on eBay or on local listings, and you will find a lot of AGP cards, which will definitely perform a lot better than this card for very, very cheap. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, the monitor turned out okay and the PC is working, albeit in single channel mode. I installed Windows 98 on it because I wanted to see how this AMD 64 behaves when running a Windows 98 second edition as an operating system and playing some of these, late 90s, early 2000 games on it. So that's probably going to be the focus of a future video. But before we do that, I am going to release another video showing you the two remaining PCs, and after that we're going to be looking at this AMD 64 in a little bit more detail, perhaps compare it with the other PCs that we have in this stack. So as always, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're interested in this kind of thing, leave a comment below, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye bye.